Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into the real story behind a gaming giant. We're going back to 1978.
Right.
It's a year that, often gets overshadowed by flashier stuff, maybe console launches. But as we'll find out, it was absolutely pivotal for Sega.
Mm-hmm.
It basically transformed them from a company that was, well, quite literally a generation behind into the titan they became.
Yeah.
They're going to pull back the curtain on some surprising things: global economics, corporate moves, key tech shifts, all stuff that really set the stage.
Absolutely. And that's our mission today, really.
Yeah.
To connect those dots. We'll start with the big picture, the global economy, specifically comparing the U.S. and Japan in '78.
Okay.
Then we'll zoom right into Sega, their structure, who they depended on, and then the really juicy part: two critical acquisitions they made.
Oh, yes.
And finally, we'll tie it all together, how these moves shaped Sega's tech, their future, and ultimately paved the way for things like the SG-1000 console.
Okay, let's do it. So the macro scene, 1978. Paint the picture for us. The European Union isn't a thing yet.
Not as we know it, no.
And for arcades, amusement games, it's basically the U.S. and Japan, right? Those are the poles.
Exactly. They were the dominant forces.
Mhm.
And the differences between them were, well, pretty stark back then.
How so?
Well, take population. Japan had roughly half the people the U.S. did, but interestingly, about twice the population of France. So significant, but smaller than the States.
Okay.
But here's a key thing. Japan's unemployment rate was incredibly low, like around 2, maybe 2.5%.
Wow.
Yeah, compare that to the U.S., which was grappling with maybe 4 to 6% unemployment. Big difference.
Huge difference.
And then the massive curveball, the second oil shock. It really started accelerating late in '78.
Right, I remember hearing about that. Prices went crazy.
They nearly doubled, almost overnight.
Yeah.
And the impact was just monumental. Think about transport costs, energy costs.
Mhm.
They skyrocketed.
Yeah.
This forced basically every export company, especially in Japan, to completely rethink how they operated.
Because Japan was particularly vulnerable.
Extremely. They were heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Something like 80% of their electricity came from oil at the time.
80%.
Yeah. Now, they did accelerate their nuclear program after the shock, but that wasn't really fully online until the early '80s. So in '78, rising oil prices just squeezed margins incredibly tight for Japanese exporters.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Energy was super expensive, squeezing exporters. But what about the money side? You hear about Japan booming around then. How did that work?
That's the fascinating part. Despite the energy crunch, Japan had some serious monetary advantages.
Like what?
Well, for one, their bank interest rates were incredibly low.
Unlike the U.S.
Exactly. The U.S. was battling soaring inflation, driven partly by those energy costs. But Japanese banks deliberately kept their rates low, sort of propping up the economy.
Interesting.
Combine that with a relatively weak yen at the time, and what do you get?
Foreign investment.
Bingo. Japan became this magnet for foreign capital. It was a genuine boom period. You saw Japanese cars flooding the global market, gaining this reputation for quality, often better than American cars.
Right, the rise of Toyota, Nissan.
Exactly. And it wasn't just cars. Japan was also making huge strides in semiconductors. RAM, specifically.
So, let me get this straight. Low unemployment, a weak currency making exports attractive despite oil prices, and cheap credit-fueling investment.
You got it. All the ingredients for an exploding economy. It's really key to understand how these big economic forces created such fertile ground for investment in Japan, just a magnet for money.
Okay, so that's the world stage. Japan booming despite challenges, the U.S. facing inflation. Now let's bring it down to Sega. How were they navigating this? They had that unique structure owned by Gulf and Western.
Right, the conglomerate, Gulf and Western Industries, which also owned Paramount Pictures, was the parent company.
Big players.
Huge.
Yeah.
But David Rosen, the founder, he was still very much involved. He held about 5% of the capital still.
And what was his role exactly? Was he steering the ship day to day?
Sort of. The sources describe him as a kind of luxury salesman, very focused on the commercial side, marketing, almost a part-time GM, constantly flying between the U.S. and Japan.
So less of a tech guy, more deals and relationships.
Precisely. He wasn't really the visionary when it came to, say, game design or engineering, but he was a master salesman, brilliant at spotting opportunities, making deals, and crucially,
What's that?
surrounding himself with talent. He had a real knack for finding the right people and bringing them in. That ability would turn out to be incredibly important.
Okay, makes sense. And physically, where was Sega operating from?
They had a solid footprint in both key markets. In Japan, 2 large buildings in Tokyo. That's where production, development, marketing, R&D happened.
Right.
Then in the U.S., you had Sega Enterprises, Inc. over in San Francisco. That was more like the showcase, logistics, distribution, local marketing arm.
And wasn't there another office?
Yeah, apparently an administrative and accounting office down in L.A., maybe Redondo Beach or Redmond. The sources aren't perfectly clear, but that handled the financial reporting back to Gulf and Western.
Got it. So feet firmly planted on both continents. Now here's where it gets really interesting for me. How did the business of arcades work differently? Specifically distribution. Because it sounds like Sega had some unique challenges, especially in Japan.
You're absolutely right. The Japanese model was fundamentally different from the U.S.
How so?
In the States, you often saw direct deals, like the manufacturer splits revenue 60-40 with the arcade operator. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Japan, much more layered. You had the manufacturer, then a distributor, then the arcade operator. 3 distinct tiers.
Middleman.
Exactly. And the crucial part was that operators had to use a local authorized distributor. If your arcade was in, say, Osaka, you couldn't just call up a Tokyo distributor. You needed the Osaka guy.
Wow, okay. That sounds complicated.
It made manufacturers like Sega incredibly dependent on those established local distribution networks. You needed strong relationships, deep local knowledge. It wasn't easy to just break in.
So finding the right partners was absolutely critical.
Critical. And that brings us to ESCO trading.
A big distributor.
Yes, one of the biggest, yeah. They were huge. And they didn't just work with Sega. They handled distribution for Taito, Namco, even imported U.S. brands like Bally and Midway. They were central.
What made them so valuable? Just their size?
Size was part of it, but it was more than that. They had really strong support and maintenance teams. Keeping those complex machines running was vital.
Right. Downtime is lost money for operators.
Exactly. Plus, because they worked with everyone, they had this incredible, almost empirical knowledge of what was working in the market. They saw what Taito was selling, what Namco was selling, what wasn't working. Invaluable intelligence.
Market insight.
Deep market insights. And they had direct contacts with component suppliers, so they could often get good pricing. They were even active in import-export. In '78, they actually showcased some European Pong and Breakout clones at a Japanese show just to test the waters and maybe challenge Nintendo, who was dominant in that simpler game space at the time.
So ESCO was a strategic player in its own right, led by Hayao Nakayama, wasn't it?
That's him, Hayao Nakayama, ESCO's president,
Yeah.
a key figure, very interested in that booming Japanese market, which was growing like 50% a year. Huge potential.
So Sega wasn't the only one eyeing ESCO, surely, with that kind of position.
Absolutely not. Taito, their big rival, also tried to buy ESCO. Made an offer.
But Sega got them. How?
The sources say Sega just offered Nakayama very advantageous conditions. David Rosen, the master salesman, likely pulled out all the stops.
Makes sense.
Nakayama stayed on to oversee ESCO's activities until it was fully absorbed by the end of the year. And boom, Sega suddenly had this integrated distribution network in Japan. Trained support staff, engineers ready to go, no ramped-up time needed.
A massive win, especially in that complex Japanese market.
Huge. It instantly strengthened their position in a market that was just exploding.
Okay, so acquiring ESCO in Japan makes total sense, especially tying back to that energy crisis. Produce locally, distribute efficiently.
Right. Strengthen capabilities on both continents, cut down on shipping, leverage local expertise.
Which brings us neatly to the other big acquisition around that time. Late 78, early 79. Not in Japan, but in the U.S.
Indeed. Gremlin Industries. Acquired via a stock exchange in late 1978.
And this was an absorption, you said, not a merger.
Correct. Gremlin became part of Sega. And interestingly, just like with ESCO, Taito was also sniffing around.
Taito tried to buy Gremlin, too.
They did. Offered $2 million cash plus profit participation. A serious offer.
But Gremlin went with Sega. Why?
The key factor, according to the sources, was the perceived financial strength of Gulf and Western industries.
The deep pockets of the parent company.
Exactly. Gremlin likely saw more stability, more resources, a stronger backing with Sega, thanks to Gulf and Western. It provided a sense of security that maybe Taito couldn't match at that moment.
Okay, so tell us about Gremlin. What kind of company was Sega actually buying?
Gremlin was, well, fascinating. Very dynamic, almost a startup vibe.
Lots of energy.
Tons of ideas, apparently.
Yeah.
They even had this kind of social governance, encouraging employee participation, but there was a downside.
Oh.
An internal audit found things were a bit chaotic. The classic right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing scenario.
Happens in startups, but were they successful?
Yeah, they were doing pretty well, around $6 million in revenue at
Yeah.
78. Lots of projects cooking. Their big hit was Blockade back in 76.
Right, the snake game progenitor?
Basically, yeah. It inspired tons of variants. So clearly innovative, even if management was a bit messy.
And didn't they have some unique marketing tactics?
Oh, yeah. The Gremlin Girls.
Tell me about the Gremlin Girls.
Apparently, they were these voluptuous young women, as one source puts it, employed by Gremlin. They go to arcades, challenge people to play Gremlin games.
And they were good.
They almost always won. Then they'd hand out cash prizes. It created this huge buzz, drew massive crowds. Very clever, very different.
Definitely memorable.
They also sent out newsletters directly to operators, keeping those relationships strong. Really understood grassroots marketing, a very distinct identity.
Okay, cool marketing, some management chaos, but what about the tech? That seems crucial here.
Absolutely crucial. This is where Gremlin really shone. They had mastered microprocessors, specifically the Zlog Z80.
The Z80, that's a legendary chip.
It really is. It allowed for much more complex dynamic games than the older tech, and Gremlin had standardized their boards around it. This was a massive technological leap ahead of where Sega was.
Which was where, exactly?
Sega pre-Gremlin was still largely stuck using TTL circuits, electromechanical stuff, think complex pinball machine logic, but for video games.
So Pong variants, breakout clones.
Pretty much. Functional, but as the source said, not very sexy. Gremlin's expertise, especially with the Z80, was a complete game changer. You saw it almost immediately with Head On.
Released under the Gremlin Sega label.
Yep, in 1978. That game was a real turning point. It showed the potential of the combined entity powered by Gremlin's tech.
So this wasn't just buying revenue or market access. This was Sega buying its technological future in a way.
You could definitely argue that. A huge injection of microprocessor know-how.
And what happened to the people? Did the Gremlin execs stay on? What about Nakayama from ESCO?
Yes, integration was key. Gremlin's executives were brought into the Sega fold, bringing that tech expertise and presumably some of that startup energy.
And Nakayama.
Same deal in Japan.
Yeah.
Hayao Nakayama, the president of ESCO, joined Sega's teams after that acquisition was finalized. So on paper, Sega had acquired significant talent and market reach on both sides of the Pacific in a very short time.
Sounds like a perfect plan.
Hmm.
But was it smooth sailing from there? Did the synergy just click immediately?
Well, not quite. Especially on the tech front, there were some initial mismatches,
Oh, like what?
specifically in Japan. Hayao Nakayama, despite his brilliance in distribution and market knowledge, apparently persisted in TTL technology for a while.
So he wasn't immediately pushing for the Z80 tech that Gremlin brought.
Doesn't seem like it, initially. Which meant that Sega Japan, in the period right after the acquisition, didn't produce many big international hits. The main exception was the Monaco Grand Prix cabinet, which was actually inspired by an Exidy game called Starfire.
Interesting. So the Japanese side lagged a bit technologically, even after bringing ESCO in-house.
It seems so. It wasn't until later, perhaps when the lack of blockbuster hits became obvious, that Sega Japan really embraced the Zlog Z80. And even then, they needed outside help.
Outside help.
Yeah, they collaborated with a company called Ikegami Tsushinki for the development of Zaxxon in 1981. That was a Z80 game and a huge hit. But it shows they didn't have all the Z80 expertise in-house in Japan initially.
Okay, this raises a really important question then. If Nakayama wasn't pushing the Z80 right away, and Japan needed external help, where did Sega's real technological leap forward come from? It wasn't just absorbing these companies, was it?
That's the critical insight, I think. While ESCO was vital for distribution and market presence in Japan, Sega's future technological success, that largely traces back to Gremlin.
Because they brought the Z80 expertise.
Exactly. They introduced it, they championed it, and it wasn't just the chip itself, but the innovations around it, like their dual board system.
The hard card thing, tell me more about that.
Right. Basically, they designed cabinets that could use interchangeable game boards, these hard cards. An operator could buy one cabinet and then just swap the board to put a different game in it.
Instead of buying a whole new expensive machine.
Precisely. For operators, this was revolutionary. Huge flexibility, much better return on investment. They could keep your arcade floor fresh without massive capital outlay.
That's smart. Combining Gremlin's innovation with, what, Japan's manufacturing strength?
Yeah, that's part of the synergy that did work. Japan was getting really good at sourcing components, cheaply and reliably. So you combine Gremlin's Z80 designs and innovations like the hard cards with Japan's ability to manufacture cost-effectively. That created a powerful combination for profitability and reliability down the line.
It really puts Sega's earlier position into perspective.
Absolutely. You had competitors like Taito already deep into microprocessors for years.
Right, you mentioned the Intel 8080.
Yes, in '74. While Sega was, as the sources put it, still tinkering with coils, TTL, relays, they were fundamentally a generation behind in core game technology.
And their main public success wasn't even cutting-edge arcade games.
Nope. It was mostly those little kiddie rides you used to see outside supermarkets.
Yeah.
That was their bread and butter, publicly visible stuff.
Wow, it leads back to that start quote you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Gremlin could live without Sega, but Sega could not live without Gremlin. It really underscores how vital that acquisition was. Gremlin didn't just bring tech. They pushed Sega onto a completely new technological trajectory.
Yeah.
ESCO was crucial for Japan, but it wouldn't have transformed their tech base in the same way Gremlin did.
And Taito, meanwhile, was just crushing it with Space Invaders.
Absolutely crushing it. Released in '78, developed on that Intel 8080 platform they'd invested in years earlier. Ingenious design, even faking color with those transparent strips.
A phenomenon.
Total phenomenon. And it highlights the difference in leadership focus, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Taito's president, Michael Kogan, was seen as a respected visionary focused on product. David Rosen at Sega, as we said, more the master negotiator, the talent aggregator. He knew Sega needed Gremlin's tech and ESCO's network, and he made it happen.
What an incredible journey we've traced. From those big global economic shifts in '78, the oil crisis, Japan's unique boom, right down to Sega's specific corporate strategy. And these two absolutely critical acquisitions, Gremlin for the tech, ESCO for the Japanese market access and distribution, it really feels like Sega's response to that challenging '78 environment wasn't just defensive, it was aggressively strategic.
Exactly. They identified their weaknesses, lagging tech, complex Japanese distribution, and they went out and bought the solutions. It allowed them to optimize costs, share that crucial knowledge, even if it took time to fully integrate.
And ultimately set the stage for everything that came later. The Master System, the Genesis.
Yeah.
Even the SG-1000 owes its existence to that Z80 tech brought in by Gremlin.
Precisely. It laid the foundation.
It really makes you think about how companies evolve.
It does. And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Now, if we pull back to that bigger picture, how often do we see this pattern? A company's biggest leaps forward, not coming from some internal genius moment, but from strategically acquiring external talent, external tech.
Astro.
Especially when the whole world around them is changing rapidly, like with that oil shock. How does that dynamic play out today? In AI, in biotech, in whatever the next big shift is? Where's the next gremlin waiting out there? Maybe a bit chaotic, but full of crucial innovation, ready to potentially transform an established giant. Makes you wonder.